Hey yo, what's up guys? And today we've got a huge update to the Critgand build. I know everyone has been waiting for this on my YouTube, Twitch, and everything else has been waiting for this video specifically. So let's jump into the major updates that I've made and the complete guide of the Critgand V2 DPS Crit physical build for launch. Let's do it. So the biggest changes that I've made to this build are primarily due to some of the issues with patch notes and a few other things that have popped up. With the patch notes from the open beta, we do see some decreases to stamina as well as hatchet and the bow. Nothing too big when it comes to the hatchet. A lot of it is just decreasing the healing that you get from the Berserk refresh, and then also Berserk getting a little bit of reduction in the duration, as well as increasing that cooldown so you don't have it as frequently. With the bow, if you're using that unbreakable focus, the 10% decrease isn't too much, so definitely just pay attention to how much damage you'll be taking. Now, when it comes to gear has been changed a lot, so they've reduced the amount of weight that you can have per tier. So you have 13 at light, and you have a maximum of 23 at medium. So now you cannot put more than one medium piece on yourself when you are light. Now I have made a graphic about this. Thank you everyone that has liked it on Reddit. This gives you a better idea of what you should be doing with your builds. So with gear, I'm not going to specifically say that you need damage output. It's all dependent on what you're doing, right? So if you're in a war situation, you're going to want more time on the battlefield, not more damage necessarily. So going into medium or even heavy is way better than going into light, due to the fact that you are so squishy and light. Next, as far as PvE goes, they have changed a bunch of scaling with some of those elite mobs. So a lot of the times when our group was going through Amrine or even Shattered or even Depths and above, those elites weren't doing enough damage. So they have increased the scale of damage, making it more viable to probably go into medium if you are uncomfortable with going into light in some of these situations. If you are low level going into Amrine, I would highly suggest going into medium, if not heavy, just to make sure you stay up. That's the only reason I suggest this, is because at a low level, they will be doing a crap ton more damage to you guys. So definitely pay attention to that. But let's go into some open world PvP differences. A lot of those changes were primarily due to the attribute scaling of Constitution, as well as people feeling like your damage at a higher level wasn't doing enough. Now, they've obviously overstepped this scaling bound. There are instances where if you are a skilled player, you can kill people very quickly, even at a lower level. But for those people that have been ganked by that Hatchet and Great Axe, this will definitely be addressed with the community's outcry. So definitely keep leaving your feedback for them to check out. This isn't something that they're going to leave in the dust. If they do, hey, it is what it is, but we all know how it works now, right? So outside of those few weapon changes, as well as the PvE stuff that I've gone through, make sure to check out those open beta patch notes down below in the comments if you are interested in reading the full open beta patch notes. Someone was kind enough to slot that into a Google Doc, so definitely take a look at that. But let's get into the rest of the build here now. You guys have all been waiting for it. Let's do it. So the core principles of this build have not changed, right? So the number one that you want to focus on is dealing damage in the shortest amount of time that you have and staying alive while doing it. So the abilities through every single weapon that we've got here, the bow, the hatchet, the rapier, and the spear, all have great outputs of damage, as well as potential for survivability and high chances of you being able to deal crit, which is the main thing that this build has benefited from, is crit. So everything that you want to be doing in this build is doing crit, doing backstab damage, and headshot crits with your bow. So on top of that, with crit, every single weapon passive that you have will reduce your cooldowns when you crit. This is huge for this build as well as other ones, so definitely pay attention to that. So the dodging changes from the open beta have made this build a little different. So definitely pay attention to some of those changes that my boy Ritzy has put together, or Duke Sloth. Definitely go check those guys out. And of course, the main proponent to this build outside of crit is Rend. So let's jump into how Rend works. So Rend is a reduction in damage absorption. Now, this isn't dependent on any element, any physical, it's flat. This is the most beneficial debuff that you can have in any build. Personally, I think it's the best and the only thing that you need for most content, as well as PvP. The amount of damage that you can outburst with that Rend is absurd. So definitely pay attention to it. Now, with the Hatchet, you can put up to 15%. They reduced this from 20, so pay attention to that. It's a little bit reduced. The Spear, if you're up close and you do that Perforate, you can get 30% if you hit every single strike of that Spear thrust. That's absurd. That is the maxed cap of Rend that you can apply, and it's pretty quick, I'm not gonna lie. So with that being said, let's jump into some leveling gear here. So when you're leveling, obviously you want to focus on surviving, but also dealing your damage, right? So if you can survive in light gear, make sure to have it. It is great for gaining that 20% boost in damage. Now that is not a base increase, it is calculated some weird way in the back end. So definitely pay attention to some of the calculations on that. I think it can get up to about 9% or something, so it's not huge, but it is definitely beneficial. Medium, you will have that 10% for damage as well as 10% duration for your CC, so definitely use that if you need to. You also get survivability, so if you're having trouble staying alive, that'll help you out. The two other things that I would look out for is luck, for getting your luck up for gear drops across Eternum, as well as XP bonuses throughout any sort of content, through territory bonuses, through faction quest dailies. There's a maximum per settlement of 3, so definitely utilize those. I would even go into PvP faction quests just to get the bonuses that come from it. It is a huge boost to your XP. Definitely pay attention to that. Outside of that, you have those town boards as well, so definitely utilize every single output that you can. My tier list for those lower levels go story missions, town boards, those faction bounties or faction missions, and down the line from there pretty much. That's like the top 3. But the main one to definitely focus on is your story mission. If you are not doing your story missions, you are missing out on a huge amount of XP, so definitely keep those up as you start leveling. Alright, so there's a few gems here that we can focus on. Let's start out with the weapons to begin with. From the V1 build, you're not going to notice too many changes, but let's jump into it. The two primary gems that I would recommend is an OPAL, which increases your damage when you decrease your stamina, and a Moonstone, which increases your damage when your enemy is below 30%. Now, if you have paid attention to gems, the Emerald does the same thing as the Moonstone, but the Moonstone does it better by a few percentages when you get up to that tier 5. So definitely try to min-max that and get that Moonstone. On top of that, for PvP, you can actually slot an ONYX into your weapon, which increases your damage to full HP enemies. Most of the time, you won't find everyone full HP, so this is very situational, but it is great if you are getting mowed down by someone, or if you're shooting from afar and you're able to hit those tanks, those bruisers, those brawlers for that huge damage to let the rest of your team pile on. And another situational gem that you can slot into your elemental chain gems are those elemental gems. So this is obviously optional if you aren't scaling off of int. It uses that base weapon damage to increase your damage on every single PvE instance that you get into. Definitely pay attention to the weaknesses, the benefits from this. It can do some pretty good damage to some of those mobs that you do run into throughout your time in Eternum, so definitely pay attention to that. That kind of covers off the weapons. Let's jump into some of the gems for the gear. So with your gear, there's obviously those tiers of resistance that you find from light to heavy. On top of that, you actually have 3 different types of gear. So I've broken them down into balanced, positive, and negative. So balance being physical equaling elemental, and positive being physical over elemental, and negative being physical under elemental. So you will find these differences between each different gear. Faction gear is actually equal, so you'll find those differences in your gear stats. Make sure to pay attention to this, because the 4 gems that you'll be wanting to slot into your armor go in the form of physical and elemental resistance. This makes sure that you can balance the two, or you can raise your resistance in one over the other. Now, I would suggest if you do have a balanced piece of gear like the faction gear, using a cut diamond and malachite. So these work off of each other and will actually boost your resistance by the other stat by 0.03. This gives you an increase over the ONYX and the OPAL. Once you have a full set of fully balanced gear, this helps you out there. If you do have one of the positive or negative types of gear, utilize the ONYX and the OPAL. This helps you figure out if your physical is down, make sure to use that ONYX. If your elemental is down, make sure to use that OPAL. So that's a quick recap of some of the gems that we will be using in this. Now going into those armor weights, as I've talked about before, these are the stats for that. So you've got light, medium, and heavy. Those are the changes. The maxes again are 13 for light, 23 for medium. So you can see that min-max on the right hand side there at 22.9 for medium and 12.7 for light. So as some people have stated on my Reddit post, you can actually swap out a few things into that maxed medium build, but I found that this in particular is the easiest to find around Eternum. Now it is RNG, but it is easier for me to manage, so that's why I put it up on the screen for you guys and everyone else in the community. Now going into some of those bonuses, with light you have 20% damage bonus and healing, and you get a dodge roll. Dodge roll is 5 meters. It costs 50 stamina each time you dodge roll. Medium is a 10% damage bonus increase, as well as a 10% duration to your CC. It also gives you that medium dash. It's about 3 meters or so, and it costs 40 stamina each time you use it. And with heavy, you've got 20% to your duration of CC, as well as 15% blocking stability and a heavy shuffle, which is about 1.5 meters or so. So not too big of a jump there. So with all of these dodges, the patch from closed beta actually normalized across the board what the iframes are. So iframes are invincibility frames. If you've ever played something like Dark Souls, you have seen people utilize these for boss battles. Now this mechanic carries over to New World. So if you are dashing from a heavy or to that dodge roll, you have 17 frames in that animation to be completely invulnerable and not take any damage whatsoever. So definitely utilize this to get yourself out of sticky situations, and if you want to deal damage, get past those CC abilities. For the Critgand V2, I would recommend for PvE using light and medium, and for PvP I would specifically focus on medium in general, just to keep your survivability up. But if you do have that experience into dodge rolling and getting away using that dodge roll cancel, you can definitely use light if needed. Now that we've covered a bunch of the base knowledge that you'll need going into this build, let's go into PvE and your damage output in PvE. So with the Critgand V2, I've added a ton of detail into these builds. I actually have a primary and a secondary build for each individual scenario, from PvE to PvP and Siege. So we'll be going through the primaries here. Now, if you do want more insight into this build and any build that I put out, I always do a full write-up on Studio Loot, so definitely check that out in the link on screen as well as the link below. So let's jump into those primaries. So with the Rapier, we'll be using primarily the most damage output that we can for single as well as multiple targets. Now, how do we do that? We have 3 abilities here that you will be using. Flurry is great to reset your cooldowns as well as deal damage to grouped up mobs, so definitely utilize that for that. You can actually cancel this as well at any time, so don't feel locked into using that. It is a little bit longer than most abilities, so you can cancel it whenever. The next one is Fléché. So this allows you to pass through enemies up to 10 meters. Now, you can actually use this on bigger bosses as a U-turn mechanic, so you can move yourself in this ability. I would highly recommend that you land on the backside of your enemy due to the last perk that you gain, which is when you press light attack after Fléché, you actually perform a static continuous attack dealing 115 damage. Now this increases your crit since you are on the back of your enemy, which increases your damage and backstab potential. So crit chance with the Rapier is really big. Now with the third ability that we've got here is Evade. It allows you to forward step, back step, sidestep, any sort of direction while gaining Momentary Invulnerability. Now this adds an extra dodge to your toolbar. If you can use this in the correct way between your dodges, this actually allows you to be invulnerable most every fight. So it is a really big proponent to a lot of builds. Now, when we look at the light attack after the evade, it actually is significantly faster. This also increases your damage as we go down the line. So let's go into some of those perks. We've got Breathe In. This gives you more stamina immediately on use. That's absurd because you can get this down to at least 1.5, if not 2 seconds in that reduction of cooldown. The base is 6, so that is a fourth of the reduction. So you also gain movement speed after this for 3 seconds, really big, and you gain Adagio. So Adagio, when you're moving forward, you gain 15% damage on your next light attack. So if you use what I've told you prior, as well as coming up with crit, you can get this down again to 1.5, if not 2 seconds. That's a permanent empower buff, pretty much. So definitely use this. So with Adagio, there is actually a perk that gives you omnidirectional Adagio. So this could help in your builds. I don't have it specifically slotted in any of my stuff, but if you do want that 15% damage increase, definitely use omnidirectional evade to increase your damage in every direction that you do use that evade ability. So to end off this evade ability, you have now got yourself that crazy amount of cooldown. So 30% cooldown, 30. Okay, now if we look at the crit, every time you deal a crit, you get 5%. Now if we look at flurry, this is a 5 stab combo, right? So each stab you get reduces your cooldown by 7%. Tell me that's not absurd. That is crazy. So combining all these, just the base amount of reduction that you have to your cooldowns is about 70%. That's absurd. That's crazy. That's a lot of damage to be continuously doing to a single target as well as a mob of targets. And the final perk to your Rapier for PvE, you're going to have Momentum. So this is 25% increased damage on your next light attack or heavy attack after performing an ability. Now with what we've already talked about before, this is giving you so much damage on top of everything else that we've just talked about. So that 25% increases every time you perform an ability. Evade will always be up, Flurry will be up secondarily, and Fléché will increase that crit chance on your backstabs. So utilize all these to give you that crit DPS. Now going into everyone's favorite, the bow. So we have got a little bit of a change here. Some of the things that I did see in open and closed beta, you'll be utilizing that light attack a lot more than usual. So resetting that with poison shot as well as penetrating shot definitely helps your damage increase. As well, debuffs are huge now for continuously damaging your target, as well as giving your party damage in any expedition that you get into or open world elite area that you find. So you guys kind of understand this stuff. I'm going to go into some of the few things that has changed. So the main change, as I talked about before, is Poison Shot. So using Poison Shot, it allows you to deal AoE dot damage to your enemies anytime they step into it, as well as if they're hit with it, you gain more damage to that target by 200%. So if we do the math here, we've got 12% with the second buff, we've got an extra 200% with that. That's a lot of damage just for one ability that is as fast as Penetrating Shot to reload. On top of that, you have got Rain of Arrows, another debuff dot to continually deal damage to your targets, and Penetrating Shot, as I talked about before, with every single damage increasing passive you could ever think about, all wrapped up into the bow. So this allows you to deal the damage that you will need with the bow in any sort of situation you get yourself into PvE wise. Now with the hatchet, we've kept it pretty much the same. The only changes that we saw in closed beta that I haven't covered is this rend. So the rend from rending throw is no longer 20% at 8 meters. It is actually 15. So when you are in any fight, make sure to get about 8 meters back, throw that rending throw, and get right back into it, because then you'll be dealing the most amount of damage that you can with this build. Another change from the V1 version is I've added refreshing throws, so this allows you to gain more cooldown reduction, as well as getting your reduction down with Desperate Refresh. Everything else should be the same, so let's go into the spear. So the spear in PvE is huge for keeping your enemies down. your boss is debuffed, and everything else basically on the ground as long as possible. So with this, we have found Sweep. So Sweep allows you to knock down your targets. You also gain damage with this through Merciless Strength, and you gain Grit with this. So Grit allows you to go through any ability, any stagger, it allows you to go through, it allows you to have a, what is it called? Uninterruptible. It allows Sweep to become, Grit allows any ability to become uninterruptible. So this is really, really big when you are dealing with some mobs that do stagger a lot and everything else. Good to have. On top of that, we've got Perforate. So Perforate is the main damage dealing ability in this build. You're going to be utilizing the second attribute to it, which is called Perforating Strikes. This gives you 10% rend per strike to targets that are above 50% health. Get this on your target as fast as possible, as this gets you up to that 30% mark immediately. It also gains stagger at the end of it, so if you do hit that last one and you do stagger your target, always good to have an extra CC on the board for you to use. Next, which is definitely a different one that I haven't seen a lot of people use, Skewer. So Skewer in PvE is really, really big for the spear due to a few factors here. So let's go into those. We've got a forward rushing ability that pushes out 125% weapon damage, as well as applies bleeds for 1 second every 10 seconds. This only has a 15% cooldown. So moving down, we have Deadly Ambush. This increases your damage against targets with full health. This is great to have for any enemy that is full health. Moving down, we also have Empower. So once you crit, since this build is focused on critical damage, you'll be critting all over the place, right? So Empower on crit. This increases your damage by 20%. 20! That's absurd for 10 seconds. And you can have this up the entire time pretty much. So at the end of it, this also increases your bleeds to 15 seconds. You've also got Exposed Wounds, which increases your critical strike chance to enemies with bleed by 15%. So let's go into how to get Skewer back as fast as possible. You've got Aggressive Maneuvers. So since you utilize stamina to increase your damage, this also increases your cooldown reduction for the spear. So every time you dodge, make sure to use an ability, because this reduces all spear cooldowns by 20%. On top of that, we also have Refreshing Jabs, which reduces your cooldown to all spear abilities again with the Light Chain. The Light Chain is only 2 attacks. So this is 10% every time you land that second hit of the Light Chain. On top of that, which I will be using primarily, is Heavy Attacks. So Deadly Consistency allows you to deal 10% damage, and it also stacks on itself. So you can gain a ton of damage through consecutive heavy attacks on a single target. So with heavy attacks, you are hitting multiple targets. I haven't tested if this is only specifically for one target, but it does say it in the tooltip. Now we know how all the tooltips work in New World. It could potentially bring your damage up in every single situation, so definitely pay attention to that. On top of that, with those heavy attacks that you'll be dealing damage with, you'll also be reducing all your cooldowns by 15% every single successful heavy attack. So to bring your crit chance even farther up the board, you have Deadly Reach. With those heavy attacks and Skewer, you will be dealing damage outside of that 3 meter mark. So this definitely helps your crit chance go up, which helps your cooldowns go down. And for every debuff that you will be applying, you will be gaining 10% damage per debuff on a target, up to 30%. So there is a lot of damage to be done with the spear. So the spear and the rapier are 2 great weapons to add to your repertoire of the Critgand V2 build. So now that we've covered some of the weapons here, let's go into some of the attributes that we'll be using. So with this build, I've tried to min-max those new weapons that we have added, as well as your survivability with that boost from the open beta to those elite mobs that you'll be facing off against. So we'll start out with full Dex. Your primary focus here is Dex. I would try to put as many points into this as soon as possible. So if you do find yourself moving into the Spear Hatchet in some of the PvE content, you could put a few points into Strength, but I would definitely put everything into Dex to start, since every weapon that we have here boosts off of Dex. You'll be dealing all the damage you need to with that Dex. So definitely get that Dex up to 300 as soon as possible. On top of that, we have that survivability with Constitution. This allows you to stay in the fight most every fight, so definitely have this. We have also talked about food in previous videos, so utilizing that food to raise any stat that you want to, except for Dex, if it is at that 300 mark, your diminishing returns will impact your output of damage, so move into Strength. So now that we've covered those attributes for PvE, let's jump into some gear here. With the Critgand V2 build, we are always going to be using Ranger to get that max dexterity. You'll have Cavalier next for Dex and Strength. You'll have Fighter as well for Strength and Dex, and Brigand, which brings your Constitution into the build a little bit. So you have that 20 Dex and 10 Con. Now, the only difference between any sort of scenario that you will be getting into is the perks and affixes that you'll be using. So when looking at this build, these are the top 4 things to be looking out for in any piece of gear. Moving on into some PvE specific armor perks, we've got Luck, we've got Refreshing, we've got Refreshing Evasion, we have Hardy, we have Resilient, and any mob resistance specific perk, so any lost resistance, any corruption resistance, everything under the sun when it comes to mob resistance. So we'll go into some of the most important pieces to your builds. Once you get up to that level 35, you'll gain all access to jewelry. So the first piece of gear that you'll find yourself getting is a necklace. At any level, you want to have a resistance gem in that. You have health, empowered, and refreshing. So this gives you health, obviously, gives you empowered on crit, and it also gives you cooldown reduction. All 3 great to have for any situation. The ring, you'll have a carnelian in, so this helps you not pull aggro in expedition. You'll have keen awareness, you'll have hardy and refreshing. So hardy is something that a lot of people haven't looked into. The testing that we found, you can actually put hardy on any piece of gear. So as of right now, I'm 99% sure that you can have this on any piece of gear. New World Database says otherwise, but I'm very, very certain that you can actually stack hardy up to about 168, if not a little bit higher, for those builds that utilize dodge or even tanks. Utilizing hardy is going to be your friend in this build. Getting an extra additional piece of hardy on your gear is always great to increase your damage and survivability with that dodge. As well, with the ring, this is the only armor slot that you can increase your damage with, so having keen awareness increases your crit chance. It is great to have on this ring. With the earring, you're going to have another carnelian, reducing that aggro just a little bit more. You'll have refreshing toast, purifying toast, or duplicating toast. So toast specifically focuses on potions. So when you're using those health potions, it can give you cooldown reduction with refreshing toast. It can give you a chance to not even use that potion with duplicating toast, and you can also decrease the buffs that you have on yourself by using purifying toast. So all are great to have. As well, any toast that you do find are on those earrings. Make sure you have those in your builds. Now, lastly, we're going to talk about weapons. So now let's get into the damage dealing part of your build, the weapons. So any weapon that you find, you want to have Ranger on it. This will give you the max amount of dex that you want for your build. Let's go into the hatchet to start off with. So we've got Rogue, we've got Keen, we've got Vicious, or Empower, or Enhanced. So with these perks, Rogue specifically focuses on increasing your backstab damage. So when you are behind an enemy, you gain damage with Rogue. Keen increases your critical chance, and Vicious increases your critical damage. So both of those are great to have. On top of that, we have Empower, so this increases your damage every time you deal a crit, giving you Empower for a few seconds. This is a cooldown to it, so it is that secondary to Vicious. As well, Enhance can bring your base damage up with every single light or heavy attack, so always good to have on a weapon if you can't find Empower or Vicious on it. With the hatchet, you will have that Moonstone gem as we talked about previously. Moving into bow, you've got Ranger again, all those perks that we talked about previously, and adding in Vorpal. So Vorpal increases your headshot damage. If you are worrying about hitting your shots to the head of your enemy, make sure to have Vorpal. If you can't find Empower or Enhance, this is a great one to supplement damage into your build. You've also got that tier 5 OPAL into it. So number 3, the newest addition into the build is the Spear. You've got Ranger on it. You've got Rogue, Keen, Vicious, Empower, and Enhance as well. So the same build as the Hatchet. getting as much damage as you can out of the build. On top of that, you can put an OPAL into it. You can slot, again, a Moonstone if you need to, but it's situational. And to end off the weapons, you've got the Rapier. Again, the same exact perks that I've talked about previously. Getting that crit chance up, getting that crit damage up will reduce those cooldowns in every single weapon that you have. To end the Rapier off, you've got a tier 5 OPAL into it. As well, if you're using it to finish off your enemies, make sure to use that tier 5 Moonstone. So that covers off the most damaging perks that you can find on your weapons. Now, again, as I talked about before, you can add in those elemental chains. This gives you more damage at a lower level for those expeditions and specific mobs, so definitely pay attention to that if you do find that. But these are the min-maxed perks that you want on every single weapon that you find or craft. So to end off this PvE side of the build, we're going to go into some rotations that will allow you to gain the most damage out of the weapons that we've selected for the Critgand V2. So your primary rotation, you're going to find yourself, if you do use the classic version of this build, you'll be using the bow and hatchet. This has not changed really, we've just added in the poison shot here to those mobs as well as expedition bosses. You're going to be utilizing that rending throw as much as you can to increase your damage with rend for yourself and everyone else in the party. As well, you'll have those debuffs with the poison shot, the rain of arrows, to continually deal damage to your targets. And once you get that boss to 30% HP, make sure to burn as fast as possible, use that rending throw, berserk, raging torrent, light attack combo, spam the crap out of it, get all those crits, get behind that boss and burn them down as fast as you can. Going into the newest edition, we're going to have the Hatchet and Spear. So with this gives you survivability as well as increases your damage with those abilities and perks. So utilizing Sweep to Perforate, to Skewer, and Vault Kick, to Rending Throw, a Heavy Attack, or Raging Torrent to those mobs is great to get them on the ground fast so that your team can deal the most damage and you can deal the most damage while they're on the ground CC'd. As well, if you do have the secondary set of abilities, you can utilize Vault Kick if that mob does come back up. It only affects a single target, so pay attention to that when you are using it. But at the end of your spear combo, utilize that hatchet where you can. In expedition bosses or elites, you are going to be focusing on applying rend as fast as you can. So you'll be utilizing that rending throw. You'll be entering the fight 8 meters away with that rending throw headshot, a perforate to additionally add rend to that max of 30%, a skewer to gain that bleed, and heavy attack spam to get that CDR down as fast as possible. Now you can swap into the hatchet here if you need to, but with the spear, you're going to want to keep that rend on your target and utilize the damage that you have to the best of your ability. Once they get down to that 30%, if you do not have a Moonstone on your spear, make sure to swap over to that hatchet. You'll be dealing damage with the Rending Throw, Berserk, Raging Torrent, that light attack spam, again positioning yourself behind that boss, dealing the most damage you can. And adding those two weapons together to finish off the PvE rotation, you've got the Spear and Rapier. So you're going to start out with Sweep, Perforate, Skewer, base sort of setup for a spear, and then you'll be jumping into Fléché, getting you past your enemies but also dealing damage to them as you go through and increasing your crit chance with a finisher to end it off. And then if they're still up and kicking, get some flurry action and spam that evade and light attack to get those cooldowns reduced and repeat back to the spear. With expedition bosses, you won't even have to worry about that 30% since you'll be up close and personal, so let's just do the same rotation as we've talked about before. No sweep in the mix, but perforate, skewer. You're going to need Fléché again with the finisher. Make sure to U-turn it, as I've talked about, as you can go to the front, to the back, and deal that finisher damage on top of it. Get that flurry out and increase your CDR with that evade and light attack spam. Then you'll go back to perforate once you've got it set up. So all of those rotations will deal the most damage possible to your enemies, bosses, any sort of PvE content that you find yourself in. Make sure to check out this build on Studio Loot. If you do have any more questions for me, put them in the comments below. like, subscribe, everything in between. Let's dive into the PvP content. So the primary things with PvP is we've got some differences to the abilities. So now that we have a person that you'll be fighting, you have to set yourself up to survive. So you have now, instead of Flurry, you've got Riposte. So Riposte allows you to be in a defensive stance and allows you to be briefly invulnerable for about 1 second to 1.5 seconds if you do counterattack and stun them. It stuns your target if they do attack you. This is a great thing to have to counter some of those things that we've seen in open beta with the hatchet spamming, with the great axe heavy attack spamming. It's always good to have something that counteracts some of those close-up abilities that people have been using to kill other players. Continuing on, we have Insult to Injury. So with Insult to Injury, you do gain grit for 3 seconds after you have a successful riposte. Moving down the line here, we have Priority. So this reduces your cooldown for riposte if you do land that riposte stun. 20%, great to have. And at the end of it, you increase your stun from that 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. So it gives you a little bit more time to dodge roll or dodge behind your target, deal that backstab damage, get some high crit potential after you use riposte. So outside of riposte, this is the only change for the primary setup that I have for PvP. Let's dive into the bow. So the bow, we have got evade shot now into here. So outside of using that penetrating shot and the poison shot, you now have more mobility using that leap backwards. It puts you about 5 meters away. It deals 125% damage, and it gives you a knockback, which is also good because then you can push your target back 2 meters. So in total, you've got 7 meters to either get away from your target or just gain some distance there. As well, you gain haste at the end of this. So 15% haste for 5 seconds. Moving away from the target or towards the target is faster for you to do. And again, as I've talked about in all of the builds, and again, as I've talked about in a lot of the bow builds, and again, as I talked about in Critgand V1, you'll be utilizing evasion tactics to deal damage as well. And that's about it for the bow. So let's go into the hatchet. The hatchet we've changed up to Feral Rush. So Feral Rush, if you don't know, actually has a seeking ability to it. So this was tested in open beta, but you can actually seek out your targets that are running away. This gives you a bunch of distance to cover, and at the end of it, you actually can cripple them and stun them. So if you do hit them on their backside, with this, it roots them in place for 2 seconds, giving you more potential to deal your damage. If you are dueling someone that has a higher level than you, make sure to use Rending Throw on them. This reduces their damage absorption and puts you on the same scale that they are dealing damage to you. Outside of that, there's not a lot of changes. So let's dive into the spear. So with the spear, we have that knockdown with sweep. You're gaining more damage. You're gaining grit on top of that to get you through some of those attacks. Now, when they are on the ground, I do not have coup de grace, so please use Perforate. This gives you that rend. It doesn't matter how many strikes you can get on your target, as long as you have 1 to 2, this increases that damage. So why not use it? Coup de grace is very slow in my opinion, and it only deals 125%. If you can add a debuff to your enemy, synergizes with exploited weakness, why not? At the end of it, you've got that vault kick again. This reduces your cooldowns in a lot of situations and adds an additional CC to stun your target. Great to use for instances when your enemy is getting away, and if your enemy is up close and they're continually kicking you down, use this as it will get them in check. You also, when you use Vault Kick, gain Empower to targets below 50%. So utilize this when they are under 50%. You get 20% for 5 seconds. That's a pretty long time. Alright, and that covers off the primary abilities and passives that you will be using with all of the weapons here. Again, there is a secondary or alternative build to PvP as well as PvE, so definitely check those out if you are interested on Studio Loot. Let's move on to the attributes. So we are starting off with 300 Dex primarily, always gotta have it. Now, instead of getting that 100 strength, we're gonna move that into dexterity. So now that we have 50 strength to increase your light and heavy attacks by 5%. You now have 140 constitution to do so much more damage with, to have more survivability. You actually boost your HP as well with your physical armor at the second tier or 100 tick, so make sure to boost that physical for instances where you need it. Again, elemental and physical, if you balance both of those, you'll have a great time in PvP staying alive. Make sure to also use that tier 5 food. For constitution, you can get up to 40 extra points in constitution, or you can do 16 and 24 points, or you can have a strength boost and a constitution boost, one with 24 and one with 16. Whichever floats your boat. I would primarily prefer the 40 con just to have more survivability, but if you do want some more damage, definitely dump it into strength. All right, so now we finished off the attributes. Let's go into some of that gear that you were looking at previously in the PvE build. We've got the same exact classifications for the gear here: that ranger, that fighter, that brigand, that cavalier. No real changes there. The changes that do come into effect come in the form of perks. So when we're looking at perks, we have got Hardy++. So this is what I was talking about in the PvE build. You have got to have Hardy. This is going to give you so much more potential to run away from your enemies, stay in fights if you need to chase them down. Plus, I think you can get around 5 dodge rolls, if not 7 medium dodges if you go into medium. So a huge amount of potential there. Definitely go into that. Find as many pieces of Hardy as you can for that end game. Moving on, we've got Refreshing, Resilient, really good to have in sieges in particular, and Dot Expiration, as well as Refreshing Evasion. So Dot Expiration, if you're looking for pieces of gear, I'll have them on the screen here. These will actually give you reduction in duration for those weaknesses, those rends, anything that attaches itself to you as a debuff. You'll have different perks that will help you out with getting those off you as fast as possible. Always good to have. Now let's move into the biggest part of the gear, as we've talked about before, the jewelry. So with the necklace, again, tier 5 resistance, whether it be opal, whether it be diamond, anything that helps you out in your gear and balancing out that defense. You'll have health to boost your health. You'll have empower, empowered on crit, and you'll have refreshing, which gives you reduced CDR. So going into the earrings next, we've got another resistance on there. We have refreshing, refreshing toast, purifying toast, and duplicating toast. Again, similar build to the PvE set. And with the ring, again, you're going to have keen awareness, hardy, and refreshing. Very similar builds, just different in the aspect of having that resistance gem on it. Now that we've finished off the gear, let's jump into those weapons. So again, same exact setup for these weapons. You've got Hatchet with Ranger, Rogue, Keen, Vicious, Empower, Enhanced. With that tier 5 Moonstone, getting those 30% low HP players down to the ground as fast as possible. The bow, again, having Ranger, Keen, Vicious, Empower, the list goes on obviously, and Vorpal to end it out if you need it. With that tier 5 Opal and the tier 5 Onyx, rapid fire baby. Spear, we got Ranger, Rogue, Keen, Vicious, Empower, Enhanced, tier 5 Opal in that as well. And to end this off, we've got the Rapier, again with the Ranger, Rogue, Keen, Vicious, Empower, Enhanced. Doesn't get any better than those 3, 4, 5 perks. Ooh! And to end it, the tier 5 Opal, the tier 5 Moonstone. You got yourself a great solid build. So let's go into some of the rotations. Now with these rotations, it'll be different than PvE just because they're very situational. Obviously, you're not dealing damage to AI, so you'll have another player in front of you. So I broke it down into damage, CC, and debuffs so that you guys can understand which is priority for these fights that you'll be getting into with these weapon sets. So if you are looking to use the bow and hatchet, you've got damage starting out first. Make sure you have that poison shot first, then go into berserk attacks, penetrating shot, feral rush, heavy attacks, light attacks, and then evade shot. So evade shot obviously doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does actually knock back your enemies. So we'll see that in CC as well. Feral rush is a huge one, especially for that root. If you can time it correctly and get behind your enemy, great to have and root them in place. And then we've got penetrating shot. Now this actually staggers your foes. Make sure to use this if they are running away. This will slow them down just a little bit so that you can get closer to them. And again, you have evade shot, knocking your enemy back 2 meters and yourself 5 meters away from that, so it's 7 meters in total. Now to finish off this set, we've got debuffs. Rending throw, you need to do this. If you miss the headshot, it's not terrible, but make sure to be at least 8 meters away so that you can have 15%. Even up close, 10% does a lot of damage to anyone's resistance. Great to have. Poison shot, again, it's a great thing as we see in damage, and it's also a debuff, so utilize that where you can. Moving into the bow and rapier, we have damage going forward. The spammable, again, as we talked about in PvE, evade plus light attacks, get that CDR down as fast as possible with those crits. You then have Flichet with that finisher. Make sure to try to use that U tactic as I talked about. This will also help you in some bigger fights if you need to get away. So utilize that for mobility as well. You then have poison shot, penetrating shot, light and heavy attacks. Going into CC, you have riposte. Now you have something that can reverse the attack of your foe. So definitely utilize that to stun them. Get them stunned for 2 seconds on that riposte upgrade. You then have penetrating shot again and evade shot. And to finish it off, poison shot for those debuffs. Moving into the bow and spear, a very popular setup for you PvPers. Shout out to Ritzy, that man's a beast with this. So we'll go into poison shot, perforate, penetrating shot, heavy and light attacks for that damage. We'll then go into CC, the CC king, sweep, vault kick, penetrating shot, evade shot, and perforate. So at the end of perforate, if you do get it to that max rank, you do have a stagger. So definitely pay attention to that. If you can get that 3rd hit off with perforate, great to have. You then have perforate again with that rend, always a great thing to have, and poison shot to end it. Now we'll move into the hatchet and spear, a little bit of a different setup here. So we've got berserk, we have perforate, we have feral rush, heavy attack and light attack, sweep, vault kick, feral rush, perforate, a lot of CC for you guys to use up close, and then we have perforate and rending throw to end out the debuffs. That is a ton of rend that you can potentially add to your target, so definitely use that if you can. Moving on to the last setup, we have the spear and rapier. So this one, you have that evade and light attack spam, getting those cooldowns again down as fast as possible. You've got Flichet with the finisher, you already know how it works. You've got perforate, you've got heavy and light attacks, and then you have CC with riposte, sweep, vault kick, and perforate, and with that final debuff, perforate. So those are a few setups that you guys can use. Again, as I talked about, Ritzy and a bunch of other people have used that bow and spear to death, and it is a solid setup. So definitely check that one out. Another call out that I would say, I used the hatchet and rapier. Actually, I don't have it on here, but it is a solid combo, especially with getting that CDR down and mobility. It's great to track down those people that continuously just run away in open world. Definitely check that out. And we'll move on to the siege setup. So with siege, there are a few changes that we will be talking about. There are a few changes in this that we will be talking about. The rapier actually does stay the same, so just keep that in mind. The bow, however, does change to more of a DPS and support style build. We saw a little bit of this in the PvE build as well. We're going to take rapid shot instead of penetrating shot. So rapid shot increases your damage. It also keeps you in place, so be careful where you use this. It is kind of tricky to use, and if you get stuck in one area, you might get gunned down, so just pay attention to that. But it does deal some solid damage, and you can reduce the cooldowns if you land all 3 arrows. On that 3rd shot, you do have an additional 25% damage. It's a great thing to use for getting those tanks down on the flag or those turrets, keeping them off with the poison shot is a great thing to have, and rain of arrows. Rain of arrows has a crazy amount of range to it. Just make sure to land that cursor at the bottom of your target's feet or the base of the turrets. It is a little tricky on how this one works, so definitely practice that up. As well, we have some changes to the hatchet. So the hatchet in siege, you're going to use this more to AoE weaken. So when we look at infecting throw, we have disease. Disease reduces your target's healing efficiency by 30%. Now this is great specifically just for that. There's so many things that healing does in Siege that if you can reduce the efficiency by 30% with one skill, that's great. I mean, there's no other weapon that has this, so why not use it for that? Weaken, again, reduces your target's output of damage by 10%. Great to have as well for those brawlers and bruisers sitting on the flag. Next, we have Mortal Power. This increases duration of disease and weaken to 8 seconds when a target is below 30%. So making sure that those targets are below 30, they will not be getting that healing efficiency that they want. And then at the end of this, which is the best perk, definitely have this as soon as possible. It creates an AoE. So 3 meters isn't terribly big, but it does do some damage, especially on the flag when everyone is bunched up. So making it an AoE, it lingers for another 3 seconds. It allows people in that area to get infected by weaken as well as disease. Outside of that, everything basically stays the same. We just add every third successful thrown axe is a guaranteed crit. This just gives you a little bit more damage. And everything else basically stays the same again for the spear, so it is just the bow and the hatchet that I've specifically called out for Siege. As well, if we look at the attributes and gear, it is the same exact across the board. It's still PvP. The only thing that I would say is in Siege, definitely go for medium, if not heavy. Heavy will keep you in a lot of fights. If you do have that sturdy perk, you can get around the map fairly quickly, so definitely keep that in mind. And again, for those rotations, very similar to PvP, you are just going to be focusing on those 2 additive things that we talked about with the hatchet and the bow, adding in rapid shot, and with the hatchet, you're going to be adding in that disease throw. So definitely utilize disease throw and that rapid shot where you can. But if you do decide to hit that backline with the spear and rapier, definitely have some fun with that, as well as any other rotation that you've seen in this video. And that wraps it up for the Critgand V2 build. Thank you again to everyone that gave me a bunch of support in the V1 build. This has given me a ton of confidence, obviously, to make builds for you guys. So definitely stay tuned for more builds coming up. As well, I will be primarily focusing on that DPS style of play. So if you want anything DPS in New World, definitely like, subscribe, comment. I will be making as much content as I can when New World comes out. As well, check out my Twitch. I will be streaming the day launch happens, probably a little bit later if I can't get the day off. So if I don't get on at 7 or whenever it drops CST, I will actually be on at 5, if not 5:30 CST. So definitely check me out on Twitch. I'll be streaming that opening of the launch. Oh, I can't wait. As I said before, if you do want more details into this build, I've done a complete write-up using Studio Loot's class builder, so definitely check that out in the link below, as well as on the screen now. On top of that, I have posted all of the footnotes that I used for this build and everything that I've used for infographics and everything else, so check out the bottom of that for those callouts. Thank you all on Reddit, specifically the user Rye516. This helped me out a ton with the damage percentile when looking at different classes of armor, as well as Duke Sloth. He has a crap ton of content out there, and this helped with that diminishing returns, as we talked about a little bit. Get some more detail into that. And New World database, always a great space to look for any info that New World has not specifically talked about. All that is there. And worldforge.gg for all the attribute screenshots and a little bit of the building, but I would definitely check out New World database for anything that you need. They keep it up to date as quickly as possible. So yeah, that ends out this video. Appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Peace. There's so much to go through. Oh my god. What is happening? Why did I add 2 weapons to this? All right, let's try to just burn through it.